with owners, particularly small practice owners, they're just getting started, or owners that feel like they are drowning, that I don't have time for X, Y, and Z. They're seeing patients, more patients than anybody else in their clinic. They're the most productive clinician. They're seeing patients from 7 to 7. They don't have time to pay payroll. And their questions are, how do I get ahead? I don't know how to get started. First thing you need to know is know your numbers. And there's a lot of numbers you need to know. But when I start talking with owners about what do I need to do first thing is you need to know your numbers. You need to start with the basics. What are your expenses and what are your revenue? Those are the two biggest numbers you need to know. And that's going to tell you in that given period of time, are you profitable or not? If you are profitable, what percent margin are you profitable? And is that your goal? If it's not your goal, then you can determine what is your goal. So you need to know your goal, know your numbers, expenses over revenue. If that, knowing your high level numbers, expenses over revenue, doesn't add up to what you want, then you start drilling down each side of the equation. Generally speaking, you're not going to take a business from not profitable to profitable by just cutting expenses. Mm-hmm. You can cut expenses, you can raise revenue. Those are the two sides of the equation to get to a net profit that you want. But if you only cut expenses, that's a very limited effort in kind of moving the needle to actually create a sustainable profit margin that you want. Now, you need to get that in order and you need to dial that in. But many times when your expenses look too high, it's because your revenue per your overhead is too low. All right. You can have these exact same expenses, but if your FTE, if your clinicians are seeing 6 patients a day, your revenue, and you raise that to 10 patients a day, your expenses per FTE or per visit are obviously going to be lower. Mm-hmm. All right. That's just the simple math. So the first thing I say is know your numbers. You got to start on the financial page. Know your numbers, know your expenses, know your revenue. And then you as the owner and or with your partners, you have to decide together, what's our goal? This is starting big picture. What's our goal? How do we want to be identified as a clinic? What's our culture? And that drives you to what your numbers should be. If your goal is to be 10% net profit, all right, 10% net profit, then you can do the math. You can say, all right, here's our expenses, here's our revenue. In order to be 10% net profit, our revenue has to be X. In order for our revenue to be X, with this number of FTEs, each FTE has to see their own amount. If each FTE has to see that amount or generate that much of revenue, how many patients does that require? That goes back to knowing your numbers. What is your revenue per patient, or what is your payment per visit? Payment per visit, cost per visit. You align those two. So if you drill it down, we need to have X number of revenue, X amount of revenue to get to a certain profit margin. With the space that we have, how many FTEs can work in that space? How much revenue should each FTE see? How many patients does that require to achieve that amount of revenue? Now you have how many patients each FTE would see. And so now you have a game plan. So you develop a game plan from knowing your numbers, but it all starts with knowing your numbers. And you do have to spend time on that.
Question. So
Okay.
I think that typically with small business owners and practice owners in particular, they're so busy putting out fires every day, right? Or running their practice that potentially they may feel overwhelmed by getting to the numbers. My question is, from your experience, if payroll is tight, or if they feel like they can't hire, a FTE because they're just unsure of their payments, right? Or their cash flow, they have uncertainty, or maybe they haven't even taken a paycheck in several months from their own clinic. We've had experiences with clinicians that have that story. So walk me through like real world in the clinic setting. How does it work from an owner perspective? Like if you're just unsure of your numbers, but you're just trying to get through the day every day, and you don't know where you can grow or where you can implement solutions to get to those profit margins that you just spoke about, kind of walk me through like what is a real world scenario, and how can somebody who's going through that right now make small practical changes or shifts in their behavior to get to the goal of being able to hire FTE to hit the numbers you just spoke about?
Well, I think it starts with your mindset. If you have the mindset, the owner mindset that I have to do everything. I have to, number one, I have to see patients. And yes, to an extent you have to do that, but you also have to do other things as an owner. When you become an owner, um, you're accepting responsibilities for a lot of other things other than just seeing patients. And you have to have the mindset that I have to prioritize my schedule, and I have to make a schedule that allocates time for working on the business that's separate from seeing patients. So you have to commit to that. Because if you're on the hamster wheel of I don't have time for financials, game planning, strategic planning, I don't have time for that. Because I have to see I have to see a patient every single hour from 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. and then I have to go home because I have family and all that. You have to some point get off the hamster wheel, because if you don't, you're stuck. So it starts with your mindset of I'm going to make my schedule. And part of that is understanding that 2 hours a week, 3 hours a week allocated to planning, knowing your numbers, working out a plan. Where do I need to be in order to be profitable? And what do I need to do to get there? And actually working on that plan and then executing that plan is going to be more profitable than the 3 to 5 patients that you would have seen in those 3 hours.
Yep, that's right.
Right.
Okay, next question. So, okay, payroll's tight. You aren't sure when you can hire an FTE, but in order to get to that profit margin that you're looking at, that's your goal profit margin, you need to hire. What do you do?
First thing is you determine what's the productivity of your existing staff. All right. And again, that goes back to you and or your partners, if you have partners. But the owners deciding what's your culture as a clinic, what's your culture as an organization, where do we want to be, what do we believe that we should be able to see, how many patients should we be able to see in any given day, and provide the type of care we want to provide in a compliant fashion. So you have to decide where that happy medium is, and that's different for everybody. You then have to take that and layer it into a financial model. And like, okay, does it work? You may want to see 5 patients a day, one-on-one, and leave at 2 o'clock. That may be what you want to do. But if you do the math and it adds up to losing money week over week, that's not going to last long. So you decide what you want to do, layer it into a financial model, and see if that is going to produce success. If that doesn't produce success, then you have to revisit the conversation of how do we get there. So going off on a tangent from your question, but you need to decide where your goal is, and then determine, are our providers reaching that goal? If everybody is at that goal, and that goal should be a range, all right? The goal is a range. Again, in my practice, it was 9 to 12 9 to 11, 10 to 12 patients per day. The other thing you have to do is actually track it. If you go off of gut feeling, you will be wrong because you always remember the busiest day of the week. The busiest day of the week is when you started the day and you had a full schedule and you had, say, 12 patients scheduled. If you work 8 to 5 hour lunch, 30-minute schedules, and everything is booked for a follow-up, you have 14 patients. Take a couple of those off, book new patients for an hour. Is a very traditional way of scheduling. Some people are going to 40-minute schedules, and you can skin that cat many different ways. But if you start the day with a full schedule, and then you drop into what's the range? It could be, again, 9 to 11, 10 to 12. You need to decide, is everybody, including myself, is our staff hitting that 11 to 12 consistently for a period of time? Now, you also have to consider, is it the busiest time of the year? Is it March? Is it October, November? Because in my 30 years of physical therapy practice, there are very consistent cycles to physical therapy productivity, if you want to call it that. Productivity feels like a bad word in many clinics, but just there's a seasonality trend to utilization in physical therapy. All right. Not as many people access physical therapy or their doctor the first part of the year. January, February, the last week of February, utilization starts to increase. People start going to the doctor, and it starts to peak in March through April, and then it tails off the end of May when you get towards Memorial Day. It kind of fluctuates through the summer, and then all of a sudden September and October it peaks again. So you have to assess, are we busy not only at the peaks, but at the mid-range and at the valleys to determine. What you don't want to do, what I've seen done, is people overreact and hire when they're the busiest in March, and then all of a sudden by the time they hire somebody and they onboard somebody in May and June, now we have an extra person and we're slower. And instead of everybody seeing 10 patients in March, you add an FTE, and now we're all seeing 7 or 6 in July, and your profitability has really taken a dive. So you have to consider seasonalities and when you're going to hire, and are we truly busy, or is it just a seasonality swing? And if you're truly busy, go ahead and hire.
How much data would you suggest an owner gather to make that decision on the seasonality? Is it 12 months of data, 6 months? What do you think?
I would say at least through 2 of the cycles. So a cycle up is March, April. A cycle down is May through August. So you want to see a peak and you want to see a valley. And did we sustain, if historically you kind of drop down through the valley, and our lowest efficiency of the year, say our lowest visits per day, and that's, I think you need to boil it down to visits per day. If your lowest visits per day of the year now are dramatically higher than they were last year, or the last valley, like last July, we were 7.5 patients a day. This year we're 9.5. Well, you need to pull the trigger and go ahead and hire somebody.
What's another? So you talked about owners need to know their numbers.
Mm-hmm.
It sounds like they need to know their numbers in a multitude of ways, right? So they need to know
Right.
profitability, they need to know expenses, they need to know seasonality of their numbers. What's the next important thing that they need to know or to track?
Well, you start drilling down into more detail. Start big picture, expenses, revenue, and then that helps you develop the goal. You want to know your goal of where your net profit, where your net operating income is, percent margin. And then from that, you then determine, like I said earlier, what does each PT need to generate? If you know your payment per visit, now you can know how many visits that equates to. Once you know that, then you have to manage your staff to those numbers. In my opinion, it works best when you have a very open, honest, transparent conversation with your staff. This is what it means to work at Jim Stoker Physical Therapy. This is what we're committed to. It's the highest level of patient care possible, evidence-based practice. We want to have a very welcoming, encouraging culture. And you know what? But we also have to meet the business goals.
Mhm. Yep.
So it's that three-legged stool, that three-legged goals of all three of those are equally as important. The business goals cannot supersede compliance. It cannot supersede culture. But you know what? If you don't achieve your business goals, then you're really not going to be able to achieve your treatment goals either. It's not sustainable. You're not going to be around much longer. So having an open and honest conversation about these are our goals, and then follow the goals. And you do have to track it because, as I said just a minute ago, if you go off gut feeling, you will remember your busiest day. You will remember the day where you started the day with 12 patients a day. And then, lo and behold, sweet Mrs. Smith, came in and thought her appointment was tomorrow, but it was I had today. Oh, I'm sorry. You don't want to turn her away. You want to take care of her. So all of a sudden you end up with 14 patients in the day. You remember that day, but you don't remember the Tuesday that started with 11 and you had 3 cancellations and you saw 8.
Yeah.
All right. So you have to track it. You have to track the numbers to know the true numbers. What is our actual average? Because that is who you are, not just the peaks of the busiest days.
What would be your advice as somebody who has been in this position? If you are a PT and you want to go out on your own, or you have made that decision to go out and open your own clinic and you're kind of a brand new practice owner, if you were talking to that practice owner, how would you guide him or her on the first year or the first 2 years in business as a new practice owner?
Wow, that's like a whole weekend discussion right there. But I will admit very readily that it can be done many, many different ways. And there are a lot of, I think, younger entrepreneurs that are doing it very differently than I did, because it's a different industry, it's a different world. Social media didn't exist when I went into private practice. And I exited private practice in 2016. It's 10 years ago. And it's a different world. So back when I did it, we were still heavily referral dependent. And so we built relationships with referral sources. And it's primary care physicians, it's orthopedists, it's whoever. It's the networks, it's industry, whatever. So we went out and actually found the referrals, developed relationships in the community. Many times we were very successful with people that grew up in the community. They knew the community, and we opened an office there. Now I think it can be, and I have seen clients of ours that do it very differently. Direct access is much more prevalent than it was even just 5 years ago or 10 years ago. Direct access clients of ours they're receiving a much higher percentage of their patients via direct access than I ever did. And so you can develop a strategy, a social media strategy, a marketing strategy that is more geared toward direct access. And I think there are many and clinics that have proven to be very successful. You also need to decide, are you going to be cash-based? Are you going to be a niche cash-based practice? Are you going to bill insurance or are you not going to bill insurance? Are you going to be in network and are you not in network? Are you going to be a Medicare provider or not? You kind of decide, again, who am I going to be? What's my culture? What's my organization? And then pick that path and then run down that path and stay true to it. I think where it becomes really is when somebody tries to be all those things. Well, I want to take a little bit of insurance here, but I want to do this cash. And yes, I want to get referral sources, but we need to do marketing over here. And you become very, very disjointed and you're trying to be all things to everybody. And you have more initiatives than you can possibly focus on. Is in any one given 6 month to a 1 year period, you need to pick 2, maybe 3 initiatives and stick to them Say no to the others. There's going to be things that are tempting, but if they're going to sidetrack you from what you already determined are most important things we need to do this year in our practice, and stick with those and see them through to the finish, as opposed to getting started with one and getting sidetracked with the latest and greatest shiny initiative or project, which I was guilty of for years.
Yeah, I think that's all business owners everywhere in every industry.
Mm-hmm. Right.
All right. Anything else that you want to talk about or add to? Any other rants that you have top of mind?
Gosh. Not off the top of my head. That I mean, again, knowing your numbers, drilling down, starting big picture, drilling down to detail, and then you got to stick with the management and have the conversation. And consistency is the key. You can't do it for a week or two. It's managing your clinical staff, managing your front office staff. I could go on and on about again knowing your numbers, but then what impacts your numbers is everybody wants to focus on marketing, marketing, marketing. How to get more patients, get more patients. Very, very true. Don't forget you have to maximize the business that you have. First and foremost, the easiest thing to control is what is within your four walls already.
Mm-hmm.
So first and foremost, again, this is how we do things at your clinic. This is how you function. Maximize the business in your door. Part of knowing your numbers is what are your goals. Arrival rate is the clinics that we see that perform the best, our highest functioning clinics have arrival rates of 95%. 92 to 95%, it is absolutely doable. Everybody thinks my patients are different and my geography is different. Well, you know what? That's true for everybody. That's what makes us all the same. Mm-hmm. Set your numbers, control what you control within your clinics. Arrival rate 92 to 95% or better. Referral to eval conversion. You need to follow how many evals are we getting and how many are actually becoming new patients. Do we actually see new patients? 90% or higher. You want to see that. Start with the metrics that you can control within your four walls. Yes, you need a marketing plan, but don't forget to manage everything that you have already and solely focus on your marketing plan.
One of the things that I really appreciate that Jerry Durham says, I'd be interested to get your take on, is that your kind of front desk person, the person, maybe they're your referral coordinator, maybe they're the person that's scheduling that eval, they are your best marketing person. They are your best salesperson, right? They're taking your clinic and your culture and calling the patient to get them scheduled, but it's in that initial call, that's the very first touch point where the patient is going to get the feel for what your clinic represents.
That's extremely true. Invest in your front office. I mean, it is truly an investment in your front office. Train them, teach them how to talk to people, how to receive the phone call for a referral, how to tell the patient what to expect when you come to Jim Stoker Physical Therapy. This is what's going to happen. How to gather and obtain the verification of benefits, because you want to get that verification of benefits completed before the patient arrives for the initial evaluation. So when they walk in, you give them a piece of paper in writing that says, we called your insurance with the information you gave us, and this is what they said. This is what they told us. Financial responsibility, deductible remaining, co-insurance, copay. This will be your financial responsibility. Does that look consistent with you? Do you have any questions? And are you prepared to settle that on a daily basis? We're required to do that based on your insurance, if in fact they're in insurance. Absolutely invest in the front office, not only teaching them how to enter information into the system, how to appropriately create a case in whatever system you have, but in addition to that, how to talk to patients. And I'll give you one example. I used to sit in my front offices all the time when the patient would check out. Maybe they were scheduled, maybe they weren't. They scheduled great. They're like, hey, do I need to do anything? No, you're good. you're good. And I forbid anyone in my front office to utter the two words, you're good, because the patient thinks that means I don't owe any money.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not ever going to owe any money because I'm good and my insurance has covered everything. And when in fact it meant we'll collect everything on Friday. We don't need your copay today, which is a whole other story. Teach them to speak clearly and specifically and not they, because patients will interpret it as something else.
Yeah.
Set the expectation when they first come in and then follow through and do that every single time. But absolutely invest in your front office.